My name is Margaret. I'm 65 years old, born and raised in North Carolina, and I've always been the kind of woman who believed in family first. I never imagined that the people I loved most could turn their backs on me, much less try to erase me like I didn't matter. But that's exactly what happened. The day of the will reading still feels like a bad dream I can't wake up from. I sat there in the lawyer's office, my hands folded tightly in my lap, trying to keep my heart from pounding out of my chest. My son, Daniel, sat on one side of the room. His wife, Melissa, my daughter-in-law, sat beside him, legs crossed, chin tilted high like she had already won some invisible prize. When the lawyer shuffled his papers and began reading my late husband's will, I caught Melissa's eyes on me. She leaned back in her chair, a smug little smirk spreading across her face. Then she leaned toward me, so close I could smell her perfume, and whispered, almost like she was savoring each word, "You'll get nothing." For a moment, the room went silent in my ears. My own daughter-in-law, the woman I had welcomed into my family, who ate at my table, who I babysat for when she wanted her nights out, she was sitting there grinning, like she had already taken everything from me. But then, just as I felt my throat tighten, the lawyer paused, chuckled softly under his breath, and slid the last page across the polished oak desk toward me. And when I looked up at Melissa again, her smile froze. Hello everyone, welcome to today's video. Let me know where you are watching from. You don't know, you might be lucky to get a shout out on our next video. Don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel if you like stories like this. Now, let me take you back to the beginning, because this betrayal didn't start at the lawyer's office. It started years ago, back when I still believed Melissa was the best thing that ever happened to my son. Daniel had always been a good boy, kind-hearted, quiet, and so hard-working. He was my only child, the kind of son who would call his mother just to check in, the kind of boy who once cried because he stepped on a frog by accident in the yard. I raised him alone for a while after my husband, Thomas, was diagnosed with heart issues, and he had to stop working. Thomas recovered, but it was Daniel who shouldered so much responsibility from a young age. When he met Melissa in his late 20s, I remember thinking she was beautiful, with long blonde hair and a sharp smile that could light up a room. She was smart too, ambitious, always dressed like she was headed to an important meeting. At first I thought, finally, my boy found someone who will love him the way he deserves. But I should have trusted the unease that crawled under my skin the first time she came over for dinner. She barely touched the food I made, wrinkled her nose at the old wooden furniture in our home, and kept glancing at her phone while Daniel tried to tell her stories from his childhood. Still, I pushed those thoughts aside. I wanted to be kind, to give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she was just nervous, I told myself. Maybe she needed time to warm up. But time only revealed more. It started small. Melissa didn't like coming to our house because it was too far out in the country. She didn't want Daniel helping me with errands because she said it was taking away from their time together. Soon, my son stopped visiting as often, always making excuses about being too busy with work. And yet, whenever Melissa needed something, money for a new car, help with the down payment on their first house, I was the first one they came running to. And I always helped, because that's what family does. But family doesn't whisper, "You'll get nothing." Family doesn't smirk at you like a vulture waiting for scraps. I should have seen it coming. One Christmas, I remember baking cookies for them, spending hours decorating the house, only for Melissa to walk in, look around, and say, "It feels old-fashioned. Daniel, we really should think about moving your mom into something smaller. This place is too much for her." It stung. This was the house Thomas and I built together with our own hands. Every corner held memories. But Daniel just nodded, his eyes darting away from mine. The wedge between us grew deeper after that. Phone calls got shorter. Visits stopped altogether. Then came the worst blow, when Thomas passed away suddenly one spring morning. My heart shattered, and I needed my son more than ever. But Melissa? She didn't even come to help with the arrangements. She claimed she was too busy with work. Daniel showed up alone, looking worn down and distracted, like he had to sneak away to comfort his own mother. I buried my husband with Melissa nowhere in sight. And now, years later, here she was at the will reading, acting like she had won some prize she didn't even earn. She thought she had erased me. But the lawyer's chuckle, that little sound as he slid the paper across the desk toward me, it told me one thing. Melissa didn't know everything. And that was the moment her smile froze. The air in that office thickened, and I felt the tide shift in my chest. For the first time in years, I realized Melissa might have underestimated me. But what exactly was on that last page? I didn't know yet. All I knew was that it was going to change everything. The lawyer's chuckle echoed in the room, soft but sharp enough to slice through Melissa's smugness. He slid the last page across the polished desk, the paper whispering against the wood. I reached for it slowly, my hand trembling, though not from fear this time. Something in the way his eyes glimmered told me that all wasn't lost. Not yet. Melissa's smirk faltered. She leaned forward, as if she could steal the page right out of my hand. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes darting between me, Melissa, and the lawyer, like a man caught in the middle of a storm. I glanced down at the page, my eyes catching the bold black letters at the top. But before I could read more than a few words, the lawyer cleared his throat. "We'll get to this in just a moment," he said smoothly, folding his hands together. His gaze flicked to Melissa, then back to me. "But perhaps we should pause. Margaret, are you comfortable continuing?" Melissa bristled. Why wouldn't she be comfortable? "Let's get this over with." The lawyer gave a polite smile but didn't answer her. Instead, he gestured toward me. "This isn't just about assets. This is about intent, family legacy, and honoring the wishes of your late husband. And there's more here than either of you seem to realize." Melissa's lips pressed into a thin line. She reached for Daniel's arm, her nails digging into his sleeve, as if to remind him whose side he should be on. He didn't move. I sat back, clutching the paper, my heart pounding. I hadn't expected this, not after all the months Melissa had whispered poison into my son's ear, convincing him I was too old, too fragile, too useless. For so long, I thought I'd been pushed out, left behind like an old coat no one wanted. But this piece of paper was hope. The lawyer leaned back in his chair, studying us like a man watching a game unfold. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "we should discuss the story behind this decision. It didn't come lightly. Your husband thought carefully about every word." Melissa shifted, clearly annoyed. "What story?" "Thomas didn't have much to leave anyway. Daniel and I already agreed. We'd handle whatever scraps were left." Scraps. That word burned in my chest. My life, my memories, my sacrifices, she reduced them all to scraps. The lawyer arched an eyebrow, but he didn't correct her. Instead, he said, "Maybe it's best we take a step back." And so, as I sat in that room clutching the page that could change everything, my mind slipped backward. Back to the days when my marriage was strong, when Thomas was still alive, when Daniel was still my sweet boy, before Melissa's shadow fell across all of us. Those days after Thomas passed were the loneliest of my life. I remember walking into our empty kitchen, his chair by the window sitting untouched, the sound of his laugh fading from the walls. Nights stretched long, and the house echoed with silence. At first, Daniel visited every week. He'd mow the lawn, bring groceries, sit with me while we drank sweet tea on the porch. I held on to those moments like lifelines. But slowly, the visits grew fewer. The phone calls shorter. I knew why. Melissa. One Sunday, I called Daniel, asking if he'd come by to help me fix a leaky faucet. His voice was tight, clipped. "Mom, Melissa says you need to start hiring people for this stuff. You can't keep relying on me." It stung, but I bit my tongue. I didn't want to drive him further away. But that was the beginning of the end. Soon, Melissa was openly dismissive. She criticized everything about me. The way I dressed, the way I talked, even the old church hymns I loved humming while I cooked. She told Daniel I was stuck in the past and holding him back. And Daniel, my boy, he listened. I told myself Melissa was just trying to protect her marriage, that maybe if I gave her space, she'd soften. I even went out of my way to compliment her, to send her little gifts, to babysit their children whenever they asked. But nothing was ever enough. I remember one Thanksgiving vividly. I cooked all day, prepared every dish Daniel loved, stuffing, green bean casserole, sweet potato pie. When they arrived, Melissa walked straight into the kitchen, looked at the spread, and said flatly, Daniel's on a new diet. He can't eat any of this. Daniel avoided my eyes as Melissa pulled out containers of takeout she'd brought from some trendy restaurant in Charlotte. I sat there, my hands folded, pretending not to notice the way my son barely touched the food I had poured my heart into. That night, when they left, I cried harder than I had in years. Still, through it all, I kept giving. Because that's what love does, it gives, even when it hurts. But love can only stretch so far before it snaps. The snapping came a few months later, when I overheard Melissa on the phone. She thought I was out of earshot, but her voice carried down the hall. She's going to die in that house, Daniel. And when she does, we'll finally get what we deserve. My knees nearly buckled under me. I knew then that Melissa didn't just dislike me. She wanted me gone. Back in the lawyer's office, those words echoed in my head. And as Melissa glared at me, her smile gone now, I realized something. For the first time in years, she wasn't in control. And she knew it. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Thomas had left something behind that would shake her world to its core. The lawyer glanced at his watch, then tapped the papers on his desk. Perhaps we should continue. Melissa straightened, her confidence returning. Yes, let's. The lawyer's lips curled, almost like he was suppressing another chuckle. He slid the will fully open, adjusted his glasses, and said, Very well. Here's the part you've all been waiting for. The room went silent. My pulse thudded in my ears. Then he read the words that made Melissa's face drain of color. The lawyer adjusted his glasses, his voice calm but deliberate as he began to read. In the event of my passing, he said, all rights, ownership, and controlling interest in the Thomas Whitaker Trust shall pass directly to my wife, Margaret Whitaker. I froze. The words echoed in my ears, almost too heavy to believe. Melissa blinked, her smirk collapsing into confusion. The what? She stammered. The lawyer cleared his throat. The Thomas Whitaker Trust, established nearly 15 years ago. Melissa's head snapped toward Daniel, her eyes wide. What is he talking about? What trust? Daniel looked just as shocked as she did. His lips parted, but no words came. I sat very still, my heart thundering. I didn't know everything about this trust either. Thomas had mentioned it once years ago, but in passing, almost casually, like he didn't want to weigh me down with details. He'd always been a private man when it came to money. Melissa's face turned red. There must be a mistake. Thomas didn't have anything like that. We knew everything about his accounts. The lawyer arched a brow. Mrs. Whitaker, I assure you there is no mistake. Your father-in-law was a very careful man. He set aside a trust long before his health declined. It was designed to protect his family, particularly his wife, no matter what circumstances arose. Melissa's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Her carefully built tower of arrogance was crumbling brick by brick, right before my eyes. I didn't smile. Not yet. But deep inside, I felt something stir, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Strength. Melissa leaned closer to Daniel, whispering furiously, though the lawyer and I could still hear. Did you know about this? Why didn't you tell me? Daniel shook his head slowly, his face pale. I didn't know. The lawyer continued, ignoring their whispered argument. Furthermore, Mr. Whitaker specified that under no condition shall the trust be accessed, controlled, or influenced by anyone outside of his direct bloodline and his wife. That means, Mrs. Whitaker, he nodded toward me, you are the sole beneficiary. Melissa shot up from her chair. This is outrageous. Her voice rang through the office, startling even Daniel. She glared at me, her finger pointing like a dagger. You knew about this, didn't you? You planned it all. You tricked him into writing this. My hands tightened in my lap, but I kept my voice steady. Melissa, I didn't plan anything. Thomas made his own decisions. Her lips trembled with rage, but before she could hurl another accusation, the lawyer raised a hand. Please sit down. Outbursts won't change the legal standing of this document. Melissa hesitated, her face burning, then sank back into her chair with a sharp huff. Daniel rubbed his temples, clearly torn. The lawyer tapped the final page. There's more, but I suggest we take a break before continuing. This is a lot to process. And just like that, the moment passed. The extreme tension loosened, if only for a breath. We left the office in silence. Melissa stormed ahead, her heels clicking against the tile like gunshots. Daniel trailed after her, his shoulders hunched. I followed slowly, the paper still clutched in my hand, my chest heavy with both relief and dread. Outside, the sun was warm against my face, but it felt strange, almost mocking. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. When I reached the parking lot, Melissa was already waiting by their car. She turned on me, her voice low but venomous. Don't think this means you've won, Margaret. Trust or no trust, we'll find a way around it. You don't deserve any of it. Daniel tugged her arm, embarrassed, but she shook him off. Her eyes burned with a hatred so raw, it sent a shiver down my spine. For a brief moment, I pitied her. How empty must her heart be, to look at family and see only dollar signs? But pity quickly turned into resolve, because I knew this was only the beginning. The calmer days that followed were deceptive. Melissa went quiet for a while, at least on the surface. She stopped calling me, stopped sending little digs through Daniel. Weeks went by in silence, and I almost dared to believe maybe she'd accepted the truth. I spent those days finding peace in small things, walking through my garden, baking pies for my church group, even sorting through old photo albums of Thomas and me. The trust paperwork still sat neatly tucked in my desk drawer, a reminder that he had believed in me, even when I doubted myself. But deep down, I knew Melissa. She wasn't the type to surrender. And I was right. One evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, my phone rang. The caller ID made my stomach twist. Daniel. Mom, he said, his voice strained. We need to talk. My heart clenched. What's wrong? There was a long pause. Then, in a voice heavy with shame, he said, Melissa hired a lawyer. The words hit me like a hammer. Melissa hired a lawyer. I gripped the phone tighter, pressing it against my ear as if I hadn't heard him right. Daniel, why? What does she think she's going to gain? The will is clear. On the other end, Daniel sighed heavily. I could hear the strain in his voice, the weariness of a man torn in two. She says it's not fair. She thinks you influenced Dad, that he wasn't in his right mind when he set up the trust. My stomach sank. That's a lie, Daniel, and you know it. I know, Mom, he whispered. I know. But you don't understand Melissa. When she sets her mind on something, his voice trailed off. But I already knew how the sentence ended. When Melissa set her mind on something, she didn't stop until she destroyed everything in her path. I closed my eyes, Thomas's face flashing before me. He had been a proud man, careful with his choices, deliberate with his words. To suggest he hadn't been in his right mind, it wasn't just a lie. It was an insult to his memory. When did she do this? I asked softly. Last week, Daniel admitted. They're already looking into Dad's medical records, trying to build a case. The betrayal burned hot in my chest. Melissa wasn't just after money. She was trying to strip away Thomas's dignity, to rewrite his story so it fit her greed. Daniel, I said slowly, you have to ask yourself, is this really about what Dad left behind? Or is this about her needing control? There was silence, long, painful silence. Then Daniel's voice broke, small and defeated. I don't know anymore. For the rest of that night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold, staring at the moonlight spilling across the floor. Melissa was going to drag my husband's name through the mud, and I had to decide whether I was strong enough to fight back. The next morning, I called the lawyer who had handled Thomas's will. His calm voice steadied me. Margaret, don't panic. The trust was airtight. Thomas prepared for this possibility. He was a man who thought ahead. That gave me a sliver of peace. For the next few weeks, I tried to return to my life. I baked pies for the church fundraiser. I attended choir practice on Wednesday evenings, singing hymns that lifted my soul. I planted tomatoes in the garden, the rich Carolina soil grounding me. For a while, life felt almost normal again. Melissa didn't call. Daniel sent me short texts, mostly about the kids, avoiding any mention of lawyers or money. The quiet felt fragile, like glass that could shatter with the slightest touch, but I clung to it anyway. One Sunday, I even dared to invite Daniel and the children over for dinner. To my surprise, he came. Melissa stayed home, claiming she was too tired. The children ran through the house, laughing, their footsteps echoing through the halls. Daniel sat at the table, eating the food I made, smiling faintly, almost like the boy I remembered. For a few hours, it was as if nothing had ever gone wrong. But the peace didn't last. That night, after Daniel and the kids left, I was cleaning the dishes when I noticed a small slip of paper tucked under the front door. At first, I thought it was just a flyer, maybe from a local business. But when I picked it up and unfolded it, my heart dropped. It was a legal notice. Melissa's lawyer had filed a petition to contest the will. And scrawled across the bottom, in a handwriting I knew too well, were the words, "You won't win, Margaret." The courthouse smelled faintly of old wood and dust, the kind of place where history lingered in the air. I sat on a hard wooden bench, clutching my purse in my lap, trying to steady my breathing. Melissa swept in like she owned the building, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. She wore a tailored navy suit, her hair pulled back into a sleek bun, her lipstick a bold slash of red. She didn't even glance at me as she walked past, her nose tilted high. Daniel followed a step behind her, his shoulders slumped, his face pale. He wouldn't meet my eyes. My lawyer leaned closer, whispering, "Stay calm, Margaret. She wants you rattled. Don't give her the satisfaction." I nodded, though my hands trembled. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about my husband's name, his choices, his love for me. Melissa wanted to rewrite it all. When the judge entered, we stood. The proceedings began quickly. Melissa's lawyer, a slick man with 2 white teeth, stood up first. "Your Honor," he said smoothly, "we believe Mr. Whitaker was not of sound mind when he created the trust. His medical history shows years of heart complications and medication that could have impaired his judgment. Furthermore, we believe undue influence was at play, orchestrated by Mrs. Margaret Whitaker." The words sliced through me like a knife. Undue influence. They were painting me as a manipulator, a puppet master pulling strings. I wanted to shout, to tell them Thomas was sharp until his very last breath, that he made his own choices with a steady hand and clear mind. But I forced myself to stay seated, my lawyer rising to speak in my defense. "Your Honor," he began, his tone firm, "Mr. Whitaker was deliberate in all his dealings. We have testimony from his financial advisor and records of his decisions spanning decades. This trust was established years before his health began to decline. It was not a sudden decision, nor was it influenced by anyone but himself." Melissa's lawyer smirked, but the judge only nodded, scribbling notes. The hearing dragged on, each side presenting evidence, each word twisting tighter around my chest. I could feel Melissa's eyes burning into me, her smirk creeping back every time her lawyer spoke. She thought she was winning. By the time the judge called for recess, I felt drained, my body heavy with exhaustion. Outside, I found Daniel standing by the steps, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "Daniel," I said softly. He looked up, guilt written across his face. "Mom, I didn't want this." "Then why are you here?" My voice cracked despite my best efforts. He flinched. "Because she made me. She said if I didn't stand by her, it would ruin everything." Tears stung my eyes. "And what about me, Daniel? What about your father's wishes?" He looked away, unable to answer. The calmer days, after that first hearing, were some of the hardest. I tried to keep myself busy, volunteering at the church pantry, knitting blankets for the children's ward at the hospital, tending my roses. The community rallied around me, kind neighbors dropping by with casseroles, old friends calling to check in. Their kindness reminded me that not everyone in the world was like Melissa. But no matter how much I tried to distract myself, the storm kept brewing in the background. Papers were filed. Meetings were scheduled. My nights were restless, haunted by the thought of Melissa twisting Thomas's memory into something ugly. Then came the letter. It arrived one Thursday morning, tucked in a plain envelope with no return address. I almost tossed it aside with the junk mail, but something made me open it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Typed across it were the words, "You don't deserve any of it. Soon, even Daniel will turn against you." No signature. But I didn't need one. I knew exactly whose shadow those words came from. I sat at my kitchen table, the letters spread out before me like a poisonous snake. The words glared back at me. You don't deserve any of it. Soon, even Daniel will turn against you. My first instinct was to crumple it, to burn it, to pretend it didn't exist. But something deep inside told me to keep it. Evidence. Proof. Melissa was showing her hand, and if she thought she could scare me into giving up, she was wrong. Still, my hands trembled as I slipped the letter into a drawer. For all my resolve, I couldn't ignore the chill that ran down my spine. This wasn't just a fight over money anymore. Melissa was trying to break me piece by piece. That night, I barely slept. Every sound in the house seemed louder. The creak of the floorboards, the ticking of the old clock in the hall, the rustle of branches against the window. I imagined Melissa lurking outside, her cold eyes peering through the glass. By morning, I knew I needed help. I brought the letter to my lawyer. He studied it carefully, his brow furrowed. Anonymous threats, he muttered. It's not unusual in cases like this, but we'll document everything. Don't throw anything away. Can they use this in court? I asked. He nodded. If it comes to that. But for now, stay calm. This is meant to rattle you. Rattle me. That was exactly what Melissa wanted. So I decided I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. The following weeks, I forced myself to focus on the things that mattered. Helping at the community center, singing with the church choir, spending afternoons in my garden. The bright green of the tomato vines, the sweet scent of the roses. These were my reminders that life was bigger than Melissa's bitterness. One Saturday, Daniel came by unexpectedly. He stood on my porch, looking like the boy I used to know. Hands shoved in his pockets, hair a little messy, eyes tired but soft. Mom, he said quietly, can I come in? I hesitated. A part of me wanted to slam the door, to tell him he'd made his choice. But he was my son, my only son. And no matter how badly Melissa had twisted him, I couldn't turn him away. Inside, we sat at the table, the same place where Thomas and I had shared countless cups of coffee. Daniel looked around, his eyes lingering on the family photos lining the walls. I miss Dad, he said suddenly, his voice cracking. Tears welled in my eyes. So do I. For a long time, we sat in silence. Then Daniel leaned forward, his voice low. Melissa doesn't know I'm here. She wouldn't want me to come. Why not? I asked. Because he trailed off, rubbing his face. Because she doesn't want me to remember who I was before her. My chest tightened. There it was, the truth, slipping out like a secret he'd been carrying for years. For the first time in so long, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe my son wasn't completely lost to her. That moment, just sitting together, remembering Thomas, remembering us, was the calm I desperately needed. For a few hours, the storm outside my door felt far away. But peace never lasted long with Melissa. That night, as I was locking up the house, I noticed something odd. The side gate to my backyard, which I always kept closed, was wide open. I frowned, stepping outside with a flashlight. The cool North Carolina night was still, the crickets chirping softly in the distance. I swept the beam across the yard, and that's when I saw it. Carved deep into the wooden fence, the letters jagged and raw were the words, "Get out." The words carved into my fence glared back at me under the flashlight beam. Get out. The letters were deep, angry, hacked into the wood as if whoever made them wanted me to feel every slash. My chest tightened, my hands shaking as I lowered the flashlight. This wasn't just a threat written on paper anymore. This was my home, the place Thomas and I built with our hands, violated by Melissa's venom. I stumbled back into the house, locking every door, shutting every window. My heart raced so fast it hurt. For the first time, I wondered if I was truly safe. The next morning, I called the police. 2 officers came, their expressions grim as they studied the carving. Looks like someone really wanted to scare you, one of them said. Do you think it was her? My voice shook. The officer glanced at me, then at the fence again. We can't say for sure without proof. Do you have any cameras? No, I admitted. Then I'd suggest installing some. In the meantime, we'll file a report. Their words offered little comfort. I knew who was behind it, even if they couldn't prove it. Melissa's threats were becoming bolder. When I told my lawyer, he frowned. This is harassment, Margaret. Keep documenting everything. Every letter, every message, every act. If she thinks she can scare you into surrender, she's mistaken. I nodded, though inside, fear gnawed at me. For the next few weeks, I tried to carry on. I installed cameras around the house, the red glow of their little lights watching over me. I told myself Thomas would want me to be strong. And in some ways, life returned to a strange kind of normal. Daniel visited more often, sometimes with the kids, sometimes alone. He was quieter now, more thoughtful, as if he was finally beginning to see through Melissa's mask. We shared meals, watched old movies, and for the first time in years, he called me Mom without hesitation. Those moments gave me strength. They reminded me of the bond that still tied us together, no matter how much Melissa tried to sever it. But Melissa wasn't done. One Sunday after church, I came home to find Daniel waiting on my porch. His face was pale, his hands twisting together nervously. Mom, he said, his voice low, you need to know something. What is it? He swallowed hard, his eyes darting around as if afraid someone might overhear. Melissa, she went to the bank. She's trying to access Dad's old accounts. She told me if she couldn't get the trust, she'd find another way. I froze, my stomach twisting. What do you mean, another way? She's digging, Mom. Digging for anything she can use against you. She even said, his voice faltered. Daniel, what did she say? He looked me in the eye, his expression full of shame. She said if she couldn't take the money legally, she'd find a way to make you give it up. The words hung heavy in the air, colder than any threat I'd received before. This wasn't just about court anymore. Melissa was willing to cross lines I hadn't even imagined. And for the first time, I realized she might actually be dangerous. Daniel's words rattled in my head long after he left my porch. She said if she couldn't take the money legally, she'd find a way to make you give it up. Those weren't just empty threats anymore. Melissa wasn't bluffing. She was escalating. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with my lawyer's number dialed on my phone, my finger hovering over the call button. But I didn't press it. Some part of me wanted to believe Melissa wouldn't really go that far. That maybe, just maybe, Daniel had exaggerated, or she'd said it in anger and didn't mean it. But my heart told me otherwise. The next morning, I found a dead crow on my porch. Its wings were stiff, its eyes dull, its body placed carefully right at my doorstep like some kind of twisted offering. I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth. For a moment, I couldn't move. Then, trembling, I grabbed a broom and swept it into a trash bag, fighting the bile rising in my throat. Melissa. It had to be. I called Daniel immediately, my voice shaking. Daniel, she's gone too far. I found a dead bird on my porch. There was silence on the other end. Then his voice came low and strained. Mom, I'll talk to her. No, I snapped. You can't reason with someone who doesn't want reason. You can't talk her out of this, Daniel. She's dangerous. I could almost hear the battle raging inside him. He loved her, but he loved me too. And Melissa was forcing him to choose. After that, I tried to keep myself busy, to keep from drowning in fear. I spent more time at church, throwing myself into community work. My friends noticed how tired I looked, but I brushed off their concern. One afternoon, I joined a group of women from church to bake pies for a local fundraiser. For the first time in weeks, I laughed, the sound almost foreign to my ears. We shared stories, kneaded dough, and for a while Melissa faded into the background of my mind. I needed that calm. When I came home later that evening, the house was quiet, the air cool and still. I set down my purse, humming softly to myself as I started to unpack the leftovers I'd brought back. That's when I noticed it. A photo frame on the mantel, an old picture of Thomas and me on our wedding day, was shattered. The glass was cracked, the frame tipped over, and behind it, scrawled in thick black marker directly on the wall, were the words, "This is only the beginning." My blood ran cold. Melissa hadn't just threatened me. She had been inside my house. The words on the wall blurred as my knees buckled. This is only the beginning. I stumbled backward, my hand gripping the edge of the table for balance. My own house, Thomas's house, had been violated. She had been here. She had walked across the same floors where my children took their first steps, where Thomas kissed me goodnight. I grabbed the phone with trembling hands and dialed 911. Within minutes, flashing blue lights lit up my driveway. Two officers swept through the rooms with flashlights, their boots thudding against the hardwood. "There's no sign of forced entry," one of them said. The words made my stomach twist. "So you're saying she had a key? Or someone let her in?" the other officer said carefully. Daniel's face flashed in my mind, pale and strained when he'd told me Melissa was digging for ways to hurt me. No, he couldn't. Still, the thought lodged itself deep in my chest like a thorn. They took photos of the wall, the broken frame, my trembling statement. But once again, without evidence, it was just another incident filed away. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in Thomas's recliner, clutching a baseball bat, the camera's red lights blinking in the corners of the room. Every creak of the house felt like a footstep, every whisper of wind like a hand on the window. The next morning, I called my lawyer. His voice was steady but firm. "Margaret, this is escalating into criminal harassment. We need to petition for a restraining order." I agreed. My hand shook as I signed the paperwork, but there was steel in my chest. Melissa thought she could frighten me into surrender, but all she was doing was fueling the fire inside me. In the days that followed, Daniel came by more often. He mowed my lawn, fixed the leak under the sink, sat with me at dinner. I could see the guilt weighing on him, pressing into the lines of his face. "Mom," he said one evening, staring into his plate, "she wasn't always like this. Melissa used to be kind. She was good to me, to the kids. I don't know what happened." I reached across the table and took his hand. "Sometimes greed changes people, Daniel. Sometimes the mask just slips." For a brief moment, peace returned. We shared ice cream on the porch, the kids running in the yard, laughter rising into the summer air. For the first time in weeks, I almost felt safe. But safety never lasted long with Melissa. 3 nights later, I woke to the sound of shattering glass. Heart pounding, I leapt from bed, grabbing the bat. In the living room, the window was smashed, shards glittering across the floor. The cameras blinked, recording everything. And lying in the middle of the floor, wrapped in blood-red ribbon, was a manila envelope. With shaking hands, I opened it. Inside were printed photos, pictures of me. At the grocery store, at church, in my garden. Melissa had been watching me. The photos slipped from my trembling hands and scattered across the floor. Everywhere I went, she had been there, watching, waiting. I felt sick as I picked them up one by one. Me walking into the church with my Bible clutched to my chest. Me bending down to tend the roses Thomas had planted years ago. Me buying milk at the grocery store. Melissa had been turning my life into her stage, and I was the unwilling performer. When the police arrived again, I handed them the envelope. One of the officers shook his head slowly. "This is stalking, Mrs. Wilson. Whoever left this wanted you to feel unsafe. Whoever." I snapped, my voice sharper than I intended. "You know who it is. It's Melissa." But once again, their shoulders shrugged with the weight of not enough evidence. After they left, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the pile of photographs. The fear inside me was growing, but so was something else, a fire, a refusal to break. Melissa wanted me weak, trembling, desperate. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. The next day, I decided to reclaim a sliver of my life. I went to Sunday service, chin held high, and afterward I stayed for coffee with the other women from church. They hugged me, prayed for me, slipped encouraging notes into my purse. Their kindness wrapped around me like a shield, and for a moment I felt human again, not just prey. Even Daniel seemed lighter when he came by with the kids, later that afternoon. They played tag in the yard while he fixed the loose shutter on the porch. We ate sandwiches together, the sound of laughter almost washing away Melissa's shadow. Almost. That night, I turned in early, exhausted from forcing myself to be brave. I fell into sleep, the first peaceful rest I'd had in weeks. But peace never lasted long. A loud bang ripped me from my dreams. My heart lurched. I grabbed the bat and rushed to the front door. And there, blazing on my lawn in letters made of fire, was one word spelled out in gasoline-soaked rags. Leave. The flames roared, crackling in the darkness, their glow lighting up the night sky. My neighbor's windows flickered as curtains were pulled back, gasps carrying into the street. I stumbled back, choking on the smoke. Melissa wasn't just watching me anymore. She was declaring war. The flames danced high into the night, orange and hungry, licking at the edges of the lawn like they wanted to devour everything I had left. Neighbors poured out of their houses, some shouting, others fumbling with phones to call 911. The heat singed my cheeks as I stood frozen in the doorway, the bat still in my hands, useless against fire. By the time the fire trucks arrived, half the lawn was scorched. Smoke curled through the night air, and the smell of gasoline clung to everything. My porch, my clothes, even my hair. Daniel's car screeched into the driveway moments later. He ran to me, gripping my shoulders, his eyes wide with horror. "Mom, what happened?" "She happened," I whispered hoarsely. "Melissa." His face crumpled. For the first time, I saw his certainty crack. He didn't try to defend her. He didn't even argue. He just looked at the charred ground and shook his head. The police came too, their radios crackling, flashlights cutting through the smoke. An officer bent down, sniffed the ground, and stood with grim certainty. "This was arson," he said. No doubt about it. For once, they couldn't shrug it off. A line had been crossed. I gave my statement with shaking hands. They promised to open a full investigation. My lawyer arrived the next morning, furious and determined. "We're not just filing for a restraining order anymore," he told me. "We're pressing criminal charges. She won't get away with this." For the first time in weeks, I felt the tide shift. The law was finally on my side. In the days that followed, things seemed to calm. Daniel stayed with me most nights, sleeping on the couch to make sure I wasn't alone. Neighbors dropped by with food and fresh flowers, their kindness softening the edges of my fear. Even the house felt different, safer somehow, with the cameras and the steady stream of visitors. The blackened grass on the lawn remained, a scar of Melissa's hatred, but it also felt like proof. Proof that I wasn't imagining things. Proof that she couldn't hide forever. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to hope. Maybe the investigation would catch up to her. Maybe Melissa's reign of terror was ending. But peace never lasted long. One quiet afternoon, I went to the mailbox. The sun was warm, the birds chirping, and for a moment it felt almost normal. Until I saw the envelope. No return address. Just my name scrawled across the front in thick black ink. I opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a single photograph. It was me sleeping in my bed. The photo had been taken the night before. The photo slipped from my fingers and fluttered to the floor. I stared at it, my heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. There I was, curled beneath my quilt, my hair spread across the pillow, my chest rising and falling in sleep. It wasn't just a photo, it was proof. Melissa hadn't just watched me from the shadows. She had been inside my house. I ran back inside, slamming the door, my hands fumbling with the locks as if they could erase the violation. My knees buckled, and I sank against the wall, clutching my chest. Daniel was at work, but I dialed him anyway, my voice breaking as I explained. He arrived within 20 minutes, pale and shaking, the photo clutched in his fist like it was burning him. "She was in here," I whispered, while I was sleeping. She stood over me. He paced the kitchen, his jaw tight, his fists clenching. "That's it. Mom, I don't care what it takes. We're getting you out of this house." The police came again. They examined the doors, the windows, the locks. No sign of forced entry. One of the officers glanced at me and said, "Whoever took this, she has a key." The words dropped into the air like lead. Melissa had a key. And suddenly I remembered, months earlier, when Daniel and Melissa had visited, she had insisted on helping me carry groceries inside. I hadn't thought much of it when she wandered through the kitchen and into the hallway for a moment. Now I knew. She must have made a copy. The locks were changed that very day. Daniel sat beside me as the locksmith worked, his hand steady on mine. "She won't get in again, Mom," he promised. Not now. For a while, things felt different. Stronger locks, extra cameras, even a motion sensor light by the back door. Neighbors kept watch, and Daniel came by every evening after work, sometimes with the kids in tow. Life didn't feel normal, but it felt livable. And in that strange patchwork of safety, I began to breathe again. Until the storm came. It was a Wednesday night when the sky cracked open with thunder. Rain pounded against the windows, and the power flickered, plunging the house into shadows. I lit a candle and sat in the living room, trying to calm the unease crawling through my veins. The storm roared outside, but inside was quiet, too quiet. Then I heard it. A slow, deliberate knock at the back door. Not the front. Not where neighbors could see. The back. I froze, the candlelight trembling with my hand. The knock came again, louder this time, echoing through the storm. My phone buzzed on the table. A text message from an unknown number. You can change the locks, but you can't change the game. My hand went cold. She was here. The text glowed on my phone screen like poison. You can change the locks, but you can't change the game. My breath hitched. Lightning split the sky outside, and in that flash I thought I saw it, a figure by the back door. Just a shadow, but unmistakable. I didn't think. I dialed 911 with trembling fingers. "Ma'am, stay calm," the operator's voice instructed. "Officers are on the way. Do not open the door." The knock came again, harder now. The back door rattled against its frame, the storm drowning out the sound of my heartbeat. "Melissa," I whispered, though no one could hear me. "Leave me alone." Daniel arrived before the police, skidding into the driveway with headlights blazing. He burst through the front door, soaking wet, baseball bat in hand. "Mom," he shouted, charging toward the kitchen. "Where is she?" I pointed, my hand shaking so badly I nearly dropped the candle. By the time he flung the back door open, no one was there. Just the rain, sheets of it pouring down, and the wind whipping the trees. But on the porch floor, weighted by a small rock, was another envelope. Daniel picked it up carefully, his jaw clenched. He ripped it open, his eyes narrowing as he read the single line inside. "He'll never believe you." Before I could ask what it meant, police cars rolled up, their red and blue lights piercing the storm. Officers fanned out across the yard, but Melissa was gone, vanished like smoke. It should have been a relief, but instead it left me cold. She wasn't just tormenting me anymore. She was playing with Daniel, too. The next day was strangely calm. The storm had passed, the sun warm and deceptive, and for a while it almost felt like Melissa had been washed away with the rain. Daniel stayed close, though, quieter than usual, as if the note was still gnawing at him. "Don't let her break you," he told me that evening, squeezing my hand. "We'll get through this. Together." I wanted to believe him. But late that night, after Daniel had gone home, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Melissa's cryptic cruelty. It was a video. I pressed play, my heart thudding. The screen showed my living room. Not from my cameras, from hers. Melissa had hidden a camera inside my house, and she had been watching me the entire time. The video played on my phone in silence, but the sound of my own pulse roared in my ears. There I was, sitting in my armchair, knitting, sipping tea, humming softly to myself. Ordinary moments, private ones, the kind no one should ever see. Melissa had been inside my home again. She hadn't just stood over me while I slept. She had planted something, hidden it so cleverly that even with new locks, even with Daniel's protection, she had been in control all along. I dropped the phone like it burned. My hand shook as I ripped through the living room, pulling cushions off the couch, sweeping shelves, overturning lamps. I tore through every corner, every crack, hunting for the camera that had stolen my privacy. Daniel arrived minutes later, breathless, his face pale. When I showed him the video, something in his eyes changed. Not just anger this time, fear. "She's escalating," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "Mom, she won't stop until—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The police came again. They swept the house, inch by inch, but they found nothing. No camera, no sign of forced entry. One officer suggested maybe the footage had been staged, filmed earlier, designed to scare me. But I knew better. The dread in my bones told me the truth. Melissa had found a way to crawl inside my world like a parasite. After that, the days passed in a haze. Daniel stayed more often, sometimes sleeping on the couch, just so I wouldn't be alone. The kids came by, their laughter briefly chasing away the heaviness. For the first time in weeks, I felt a tiny spark of normal life. I baked cookies. I read bedtime stories to my grandchildren. I even dared to smile. But peace is a fragile thing, and Melissa knew just how to shatter it. It was a Sunday morning when it happened. The church bells from down the street were ringing, families strolling in their best clothes. I had just stepped onto the porch with a tray of muffins when I saw it. A moving truck. Daniel walked up the driveway, his face stiff, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "She's moving in next door," he said quietly. I turned, my tray nearly slipping from my hands. And there she was, Melissa, standing in the neighboring yard, sunglasses perched on her face, that same cold smirk curling her lips. She lifted a hand, wiggled her fingers in a mocking little wave, as if to say, "You'll never escape me." She stood there like she owned the world, sunglasses hiding her eyes, lips curled into that triumphant smirk. Melissa leaned casually against a box as movers hauled her things inside the house next door. It was as if she had drawn an invisible line across the lawn, my home on one side, her new territory on the other. "You can't be serious," I whispered, my knees buckling. Daniel caught my arm, steadying me. His face was stone, his jaw set, but I could see the storm behind his eyes. "She's not moving in because she wants a house, Mom. She's moving in because she wants to break you." And for a while it worked. The following weeks felt like a nightmare stitched into my every waking hour. I couldn't step outside without seeing her. She would stand at her window, sipping coffee, staring. Sometimes she waved. Sometimes she blew a kiss. Once she mouthed the words, "Still mine." The police couldn't do much. It wasn't illegal to buy the house next door. Every complaint I made was dismissed with polite shrugs. "She hasn't done anything actionable," they'd say. But I knew Melissa. This wasn't just spite. It was war. One evening, Daniel stormed into the kitchen, slamming his fist against the table. "Enough," he growled. "If the law won't stop her, I will." I grabbed his arm. "No, that's what she wants. She wants to drag you down into her chaos." And then it hit me. Melissa wanted control. She wanted me to feel small, helpless, humiliated. But there was one thing she hadn't counted on: my patience. My ability to wait, to plan, to strike when she least expected it. The lawyer had hinted weeks ago there were other provisions in the will, things Melissa hadn't seen. I called him the next morning. "Ah, Mrs. Parker," he said warmly. "I was wondering when you'd be ready." And just like that, the tide began to turn. Because my late husband, God rest his soul, hadn't only left money. He had left power, properties, shares, accounts in places Melissa didn't even know existed. Assets that, once finalized, would give me not just security, but leverage. I stayed quiet. I smiled at Melissa when she smirked. I waved back when she mocked me. I let her think she had won. Until the day of the community meeting. Melissa strutted in wearing designer heels, flashing her pearly grin, already charming neighbors with her lies. But when the lawyer stood, papers in hand, and cleared his throat, the room hushed. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "as executor of the Parker estate, I am here to announce new ownership stakes in the neighborhood development project. Effective immediately, Mrs. Evelyn Parker," he gestured toward me, "holds majority rights to this community." The air shifted. Melissa's smile cracked, her face draining of color. I leaned back in my chair, mimicking the same smug posture she had once used at the will reading. I whispered, just loud enough for her to hear, "You'll get nothing." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The room applauded politely, oblivious to the private war unfolding between us. But in that moment, Melissa finally understood. She hadn't just lost the game. The game had been mine all along. And when I stood to leave, I walked past her slowly, my head high. I didn't need revenge served hot or cold. I only needed her to see that her cruelty had built nothing, while my kindness, patience, and strength had built everything. That was the day Melissa's smirk froze for good.